The email subject line was one word: withdrawn. I was standing in the cereal aisle with a basket looped over my wrist, comparing prices like the grown-up I'd finally learned to be, when the notification slid across my screen and took the floor out from under me. "We've received your request to withdraw your application to the Whitlock Fellowship," it read, as cheerful as a birthday card. "We wish you the best in your future endeavours." I stood there with a box of oats in one hand and the phone in the other, feeling the strange, weightless terror of a roller coaster before the drop. I hadn't withdrawn anything. The Whitlock was the dream I had fed for 3 years: late nights, volunteer hours, a portfolio threaded with careful risks. I put the oats back on the shelf because I couldn't be the kind of person who bought cereal while her life unspooled. My name is Chloe Hart. This is the story of how my best friend betrayed my trust so quietly it sounded like kindness, and how I learned to hear the truth anyway. The thing about a slow betrayal is that it doesn't arrive draped in drama. It comes in as a favor, a suggestion, a let me help. When I met Sharon, she had the kind of presence that rearranged a room. We were 22, insecure in different directions. She walked like the hallway belonged to her. I walked like I was borrowing it. She carried 3 pens at all times, one for lists, one for ideas, one for the things she never let me see. At our first coffee she said, "You're the only person who talks about their work like it matters," and I fell a little bit in love, not romantic, but the way you fall for a sister you haven't met yet. We became a shorthand. I was the one who remembered everyone's birthdays. She was the one who would call a landlord and make him fix the boiler by sheer force of tone. When I got the entry-level job at the gallery, she brought a bottle of cheap Prosecco and said, "One step closer to Whitlock," and we drank it on my floor from mugs because grown-ups are just children with rent. The first favor didn't feel like a favor, it was a password. "Let me help you organize your inbox," she said, kneeling in front of my laptop like a priest, hair in a knot, eyes bright with purpose. "You miss things, you're too polite to star what matters." We set up folders with names that made me feel efficient: grants, portfolio, mentors. She made filters. She tested them. She taught me a keyboard shortcut I still use. I made us tea and said, "You're saving my life," which felt true. It didn't occur to me to ask what else the filters did. Why would it? Love and trust look the same when you're looking forward. Then came the little losses. A curator I'd admired, Martha Klein, the kind of woman whose earrings made statements, stopped replying to my emails. I assumed I'd been too eager, too long-winded to me. Daisy from the archive, who had once borrowed my scarf and returned it with a note that said, "For courage," began to dodge lunches, cancelling with apologies that read like fortune cookies another time. Soon turned into never. An internship I had turned down years earlier emailed to say they were honoured I'd come back, which made no sense, but I wrote a nice reply anyway. The gallery director asked if I was still on for my Saturday shift and looked surprised when I said yes. "Oh, I thought you swapped. Sharon mentioned you needed the day." I didn't, but I didn't want to make Sharon look bad for offering me a life where I didn't have to work Saturdays. It was easier to say, "Right, sorry, miscommunication." Sharon listened the way hungry people listen to recipes. She knew the soft spots. She knew about my father leaving and my mother folding her grief into housework. She knew the kind of compliment that felt like a roof. "You're so brave," she'd say when I did something as small as ask for feedback. "You're so decent," she'd murmur when I failed to push back. She knew that my worst fear wasn't failure, it was being too much. So when she offered to look over my Whitlock statement, only because I know how committees read, I handed it over like it was a letter to God. She cut a paragraph that meant the world to me. "It's too raw," she said. "They'll smell blood." I swallowed the urge to defend it because Sharon was the one who knew. She took my drafts and returned them tighter, glossier, less Chloe and more something that might win. The missing pieces got bigger. I didn't get an invitation to the Whitlock pre-reception, which was odd because Martha had mentioned I'd be on the smaller list. "Budget cuts," Sharon said, disgusted on my behalf. "Typical, you don't need their canapé club." When I told her about a podcast that wanted to interview emerging curators, she made a face. "Podcasts steal your time and give you nothing. Say no, save your voice." I trusted her, so I wrote a nice decline and turned back to my statement, which kept getting sharper and less honest. "You're being strategic," she soothed, blue pen dancing over my verbs. "You can tell your true story when you're in the room." There were days I couldn't shake the sense that my life was happening in another tab. I would open my email in the morning and something would feel shaved down. A chain would be missing the first message. A "thank you for your time" would sit in my sent folder that I couldn't remember writing, but that sounded almost like me. I blamed sleep. Stress does tricks. When Daisy stopped meeting my eyes at work, I told myself she was going through something. When I arrived at a studio visit I'd been excited about and the artist said, "I thought you cancelled." I laughed and blamed Outlook. "I would never cancel on you," I said, and felt like I was talking to a mirror in a dark room. The night things broke open started ordinary. I reheated soup, I folded laundry. I sat on the floor with my laptop and watched the cursor blink like a patient heartbeat. My phone buzzed. "Sharon, dinner tomorrow, you can't hide in your house forever." I typed sure, and then because habits persist even when your life is unraveling, I clicked on the spam folder out of reflex. A Whitlock email sat there like a small bomb. "We're confirming the address for your portfolio return," it began. Return? My brain tried to manufacture a plausible scenario where this didn't mean I'd been rejected without being told. I opened my inbox search bar and typed Whitlock. Results 4. 2 were the generic "thank you for applying." 1 was the withdrawn that had turned my legs to paper. The 4th was something else entirely. "Confirm withdrawal request," from 2 days earlier marked read. My stomach flipped. Sometimes the tiniest motion ruins you. I clicked details. It said the email had been opened on another device. I followed the breadcrumb trail through menus I'd never bothered with because I thought good people could afford not to be paranoid. Recent sessions, IP addresses. A device I didn't recognize had accessed my account 3 times in 72 hours. The city location hovered 1 neighborhood over from mine. I clicked the IP. It meant nothing to me, I Googled. It meant nothing to me, except a string of numbers that looked like a code it would take a different version of Chloe to crack. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered and then did what I've always done when panic arrives in a nice dress. I made a list. 1. Someone accessed my account. 2. A withdrawal was confirmed. 3. I didn't do it. 4. Who had my password. The list stopped there because the room got too small. Sharon had set up my filters. She had asked for my password that first night with the tea and the pens. "We'll change it after I fix your chaos," she'd said. We never did. Somewhere a kettle clicked off. I couldn't place the sound until I realized it was in my own kitchen from the last time I boiled water and forgot. My fingers felt cold. I typed a new password, one of those absurd ones no one could guess, and sat very still on the floor while the account forced me to log out of other sessions. Somewhere in the settings, a quiet switch flipped back to me. The proof I found next didn't come with fireworks, it was practical. In my filters and blocked addresses tab, a rule I didn't create sat with a smile. If subject contains Whitlock Martha Fellowship Interview, then skip inbox, mark as read, apply label, archive. Another rule: if from Martha Klein, forward to redacted at mail.com. The forwarding address was a free account with a name like a screen name from high school, Stillwater 79. My throat made a sound that didn't belong in a human body. I should have called someone. I should have called Daisy or my mother or the help desk or 911. Instead, I did something small and unlovely. I cried into the sleeve of the sweater I wore when I needed to feel like I had armor. The sleeve didn't mind. When my face felt less like it was falling off, I took screenshots. I took more screenshots than necessary because evidence, I was learning, is generosity you give your future self. I disabled forwarding. I deleted the rules. I changed the password again, and this time I added numbers that meant something only to me. Then I opened the sent folder and scrolled. There it was, the email that had gotten my portfolio returned, and my chances marched to the door. "Dear Whitlock Committee, thank you for your consideration. After much soul-searching, I've decided the timing isn't right. I withdraw my application. Warmly, Chloe Hart." It was gentle. It was measured. It was not me. I clicked Show Original. The headers are a language outsiders aren't supposed to speak. I understood just enough to see that the IP was the same as the another device. I Googled again. Still a string of numbers. I copied everything into a doc titled Proof and saved it 3 times, in places I would forget and find with relief. Question: how does a person who would do this to you look in your mind the moment before you know? Answer: like your friend. Like the one who brings soup when you're sick and remembers the inside joke label on your coffee order and texts you at 1:12 a.m. you awake. This meme is you. They look like the person who would warn you about everyone else. That's the cruelty. Betrayal dresses in your favorite sweater and uses your mugs. I set my laptop on the coffee table, stood up too fast, and the room tilted. I went to the kitchen and turned on the light because I needed to be in a room that didn't know my name. I poured water and didn't drink it. Then I did the most teenager thing I've done as an adult. I opened my phone and scrolled through Sharon's Instagram with a detective's greed, looking for crumbs. A story from 2 days ago, the night my withdrawal was confirmed. A photo of a glass of wine on a coffee table with my friend's caption, "Finally fixing chaos, laptop sparkles." The laptop in the frame wasn't hers. There was a small scratch on the corner mine from when I moved in and bumped it against a doorframe. I pinched the screen to zoom until the pixels yelled back at me. The reflection in the black edge was nothing but a smear that could have been anyone. But the rug was mine. The pattern was a cheap imitation of a Kaleem I once loved in a shop window, an indulgence I allowed myself when the gallery gave me my first raise. "Your place is so you," Sharon had said, stepping onto it in bare feet and sighing like a cat. "I called the locksmith at 11:23 p.m. emergency," he asked, because we categorize our pain. "No," I said, "but soon." He came anyway. He changed the cylinder. He gave me 3 keys. "Don't count who you give them to as love," he said, eyes kind in a way that made me suspect he'd seen more of this than locks. I slept with the light on and my phone face down under my pillow like a talisman you know better than to trust. Morning brought the viscosity of after. I went to work because the body insists on forward motion when the mind wants to lie down in traffic. Daisy avoided me in the break room and I decided to stop letting other people's decisions be the map. "Did I offend you?" I asked, voice gentler than my pulse. She blinked, startled, then flushed. "I thought you were mad at me," she said. "Sharon said you were stressed about me stealing your contacts." The sentence hit like a bucket of cold water. "What?" I asked. She fumbled. "She said you asked me not to, that you felt I was using your work. I'm sorry if—" "I never said that," I said, and for once my voice surprised me by not apologizing for existing. "I would never say that. Did she text you?" Daisy nodded small. "Could you forward it to me?" She did. It was a screenshot of a message that began, "Hey Daisy, it's Chloe. Too awkward to say this in person, but—" The language looked almost like mine. The ellipses were in the wrong places. I took a late lunch and walked, phone in my pocket like a rock I didn't want to sit on. The city was doing its exaggerated version of spring, trees desperate to be seen, people too cold to be as hopeful as their jackets implied. I sat on a bench and made a plan that would require a kind of courage I had not exercised. I texted Sharon, "Dinner tonight, mine, I'll cook." She replied in under a minute. "Who are you and what have you done with my friend who orders takeout? 7 okay. "Perfect," I typed. At 6:40, I set 2 plates on the table and 2 wineglasses beside them, and then I put my laptop open between the salt and the pepper with the proof doc up on the screen like a quiet guest. I heard her heels in the hallway before the knock, because I know the rhythm of her walking like you know the song your mother hummed over the sink. She came in with her own bottle, insurance, and a hug I let happen because I wanted one more time to remember what I had loved. "Smells amazing," she said, peeking into the pot. "Who are you, Martha Stewart?" I had time, I said. I poured the wine. I sat. We talked about nothing for 13 minutes precisely because I watched the clock. We traded the small coins of our days. Then I said, "We should eat," and we did, her complimenting a sauce I'd bought and decanted into a jar to make it look like effort. When the plates were mostly empty, I said, "I got an email from Whitlock." Her fork paused, then lowered, then lifted again, an actor blocking a scene. "Did you?" She said, bright with the kind of joy that lives with teeth, "Tell me everything." I withdrew, I said. I watched her face for the flicker. It came, not surprise, not confusion, something else, calculation. "You did," she said, arranging her features. "Chloe, why? That's not like you. I mean, it is like you to be careful, but—" "I didn't withdraw," I said, quiet, "but someone did from my account, from my apartment." I turned the laptop toward her and clicked the screenshots like a slideshow in a class where the professor has decided to stop being gentle. She looked and looked away and looked back. Her face did not flush. She has always been good at not blushing. "This is crazy," she said, and the word made a small cold river run through me. Crazy. That old friend used to box me in. Who would do that? She added, and her tone was a scaffold for my doubt. "You tell me," I said. I clicked on the Instagram story with my scratched laptop and my almost Kaleem. "This is my rug," I said. "That's my scratch." My voice did not rise, it did not shake. It found a gear I didn't know I had, low, steady, the one you use to climb out of a ditch when the tires want to spin. "I changed my locks," I said. "I've saved everything. I've told Martha I never withdrew. She asked me to come in tomorrow to talk. She said the committee noticed my letter didn't sound like me. I let that hang in the air like a bell. It didn't." Her eyes flashed, then went flat. "Are you accusing me?" she asked, soft. I could hear in the softness the old dynamic breezing in, ready to set the table. Chloe is sensitive. Chloe misremembers. Chloe needs me to help her frame the narrative so she doesn't get hurt. I pictured Daisy's forwarded message with the ellipses in the wrong places. I pictured the rule that sent Whitlock into a folder labeled archive like it was a mistake I could come back to later. "I'm telling you what I found," I said, "and I'm asking why there are emails from my account to people I care about that I didn't write." You shared your password, she said, as if the sharing made the taking fair. You asked me to fix your chaos. I asked you to help, I said. I didn't ask you to choose my future for me. The room felt suddenly too small for both of us and the truth. She sat back, set her fork down with a tiny click, and shifted into a voice I realized I had mistaken for wisdom for 2 years. Chloe, she said, the Whitlock would have eaten you alive. You're not ruthless, you're tender. You take things too personally. I did you a favor. The words were so cleanly cruel I nearly admired their efficiency. And Daisy, she went on, riding the old horse now that she'd found its stride, she uses you. She takes your contacts and calls it collaboration. I was protecting you. You always say you want a friend who tells the hard truth. Here I am. In the version of me who used to need saving, this is where I would have folded. I would have apologized for being ungrateful and cried and thanked her for seeing what I couldn't. The woman sitting at that table had a different spine. I let her words settle. I let them find no purchase. I said, from now on my hard truths will come from me. I closed the laptop. You need to leave. She laughed then, low and ugly in a way I'd never heard before. You'll crawl back, she said, not like a threat, like a weather report. You always do when the world bruises you. I stood, I opened the door. I'm not the one who needs to worry about bruises, I said, and the line sounded like something I'd rehearse in a mirror if I were a different kind of person. It didn't feel like a mic drop. It felt like a door closing on a house that had been leaking for a long time. When she was gone, my body did the shaking my voice had refused. I sat on the kitchen floor and breathed like a swimmer who has forgotten she knows how. The clock on the oven glowed 9:03. I texted Martha, can we move our meeting earlier? She wrote back within 10 minutes because some women have built their lives around answering when the right person asks. 8 a.m., she said. Bring what you have. I wrote, I will, and then I did something small that mattered. I deleted the forwarding address again because my hands needed to do a thing that made the world more mine. I didn't sleep so much as pace the night, folding it into squares. At dawn I showered, pulled on the black dress I wear when I want to remember I'm not apologizing for taking up space, and put my hair in a bun that meant business. On the way out, I glanced at the peg by the door where I used to hang my spare key for friends. It was bare now, a little question mark of empty wood. I slid the new keys into my bag and wrapped the strap tight across my chest like a cross-your-heart promise. Outside, the city was just waking up, pretending we're all starting at the same line. I walked past a woman walking a dog with a sweater and a man in a suit eating a banana with the seriousness of a sacrament. I thought about what Sharon had said, the favor dressed as mercy. I thought about all the ways I had let myself be rescued because it felt like love. At the crosswalk, a cyclist dinged his bell and I stepped back just in time, heart thudding. The light changed. I crossed. There's a moment, right before you sit down across from someone who can reopen a door, when you realize your story has to sound like evidence, not yearning. I pushed open the glass door to Martha's office, and the air smelled like paper and coffee and possibility. She stood when she saw me and didn't waste time with small talk. I read your withdrawal, she said, quotation marks in her tone. It didn't sound like you. I set the laptop on the table between us like an altar and opened the proof doc. It wasn't, I said. This is where I'll stop for now, at the table where truth was about to start making repairs. In another room, my former best friend would be telling herself a story where she remains the hero. Some villains never meet themselves, but karma doesn't need an audience. It needs documentation and a door held open for consequence. I had both. Martha didn't interrupt. She watched the screenshots the way a surgeon watches a scan, seeing the shapes beneath the shapes, asking the kind of questions that don't perform outrage, they collect facts. When I finished, she folded her hands and said, You brought me documentation. Good, now bring me context. So I told her, about the filters I never made, about the withdrawn letter that sounded almost like me but wasn't, about the way Daisy had begun to orbit farther out. About the Saturday shifts I swapped without agreeing to, the podcast I'd declined in a voice that wasn't mine, the steady thinning of my days until my life fit in a pocket that wasn't mine either. I did not dramatize. I labeled dates, read subject lines, handed over headers. Somewhere in the telling my voice found a register I hadn't heard in myself, neither pleading nor defensive. It was the sound a wall makes when it finally decides to hold. Martha leaned back. The light from the window cut her profile into angles. You did not withdraw, she said partly to herself. Someone attempted to curate you out. The corner of her mouth twitched, humor's shadow. The committee flagged the syntax, she added. You write like you were raised by hard-working librarians and stubborn aunties. That letter, she tapped my laptop, belongs to someone who learned the word warmly from a style guide. She stood. I'm going to step out and speak to 2 people. You'll wait. It wasn't a request. It was an instruction from a woman who has spent a career instructing rooms. I sat very still in the chair while the gallery upstairs began its morning rituals, doors opening, keys chiming, the coffee machine's first sputter. On the wall, a photograph of a river taken from a bridge looked back at me like a future I was about to cross into, whether I felt brave or not. When Martha came back, she wasn't alone. The fellowship coordinator stood beside her, a man who wore apology like a well-fitted jacket. Ms. Hart, he said, we've reopened your application as of now. We've also flagged the email account that forwarded committee correspondence as a breach. It will pursue it with our counsel. He cleared his throat. We are grateful you brought this to us calmly. Many people shout, you brought receipts. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the relief made a sound in my chest and had to escape somehow. Thank you, I said, the words small and sincere, like coins placed in exactly the right palm. Martha leaned against the table the way only women certain of their ground do. I will not tell you to be grateful for sabotage, she said. I will tell you to learn from it, change every password you own, put a key where only you can find it, and I do not mean the kind made of metal. She considered me the way you consider a piece you've decided to acquire, fit, condition, provenance. And Chloe, she added, stop letting people edit out the sentences that make you you. If a committee punishes your blood, they don't deserve your work. She straightened. Now go eat something with protein, then draft me a note explaining in your own voice what your work wants. 10 a.m. tomorrow, my desk. Outside, the day had brightened into a sky so clean it looked laundered. I walked toward the gallery with my shoulders an inch lower and bought a breakfast sandwich from the cart where the vendor calls everyone boss as a blessing. On the bench, with egg and hope in equal measure, I texted Daisy. Can we talk today? I owe you the truth. She replied within a minute. Yes. She met me in the little park behind the gallery where kids climb a sculpture that looks like a question mark fallen on its side. She hugged herself, not against me, but against the weeks of awkwardness that had grown between us like ivy. I told her everything I had found and everything I had let happen in the name of friendship. She didn't gasp. She didn't perform shock. She listened like someone laying out tools before a repair. When I finished, her face did that firming thing a person's face does when the anger finally has a target and it isn't you. She texted me as you, she said, measured. She copied your little mistakes, the ellipses, the way you say when you're teasing. I wondered why it felt off. I let it be on because it was easier. She swallowed. I'm sorry for believing what protected me from a hard conversation. We both chose easy, I said. I'm done with easy. We walked the perimeter once, the way people pace at wakes because standing still makes grief sink its teeth. What do you need? She asked. It was the most generous question anyone had asked me in months. A witness, I said. Someone who will not let me be the only narrator in rooms where she's already told my story. She nodded. Then I'll be that, and Chloe, she stopped. If you ever need me to say in public that I believed a lie, I will. Pride is cheaper than peace. Relief is a physical thing. It lifted something inside my ribs like a bird testing a wing. Thank you, I said, and meant more than 2 words can carry. The gallery day moved at the speed of errands. I changed all the logins. I deleted the shared calendars I hadn't realized were shared. I printed and signed a form the bookkeeper had sent weeks ago that somehow went to an archive label. I sent the podcast a note. I was misinformed. If the invitation stands, I would like to talk. They wrote back. We'd love that. The intern, Mina, 19, eyes bright with the kind of hope that resprouts no matter how many feet step on it, caught me by the supply closet. Ms. Hart, she said, and then blushed because she never called me that. I want you to know that Ms. Sharon told me not to bother you because you were fragile. You are the opposite, that's all. She scurried away before I could decide whether to cry or adopt her. I added a line to a list I had started in my notes app titled What I Know Now. People will narrate you into shapes that fit their hands. Decline the costume. At 5:30 my phone rang. Sharon, I didn't answer. She texted, we need to talk, you're overreacting. Then, I did you a favor. Then, without me you will melt. The escalation was whiplash in 3 lines. I put the phone face down and it still felt like it was looking at me. I walked to the train, and on the platform a busker played a violin with such tender ferocity that the crowd forgot to pretend not to listen. The music lifted and laid itself over us like a temporary roof. I closed my eyes and let it be the only story for 3 minutes. When I opened them, the train was coming, a silver mouth reaching for us. At home, I found an envelope under my door with my name written in a handwriting I knew too well. Inside, the spare key I had once given her. No note. It felt like an apology translated into a language that refused to use the word sorry. I set it in the bowl with the rings I hadn't known I was keeping, a private archive of things I no longer owed. I didn't text thank you. Grace is not a leash. The next morning I wrote the fellowship note like a person finally allowed to speak at normal volume. I didn't tidy my story to be palatable. I named what my work wanted, to steward risk, to put careful hands on new voices, to make rooms where tenderness is not a liability but a method. I walked it to Martha's office because some things shouldn't travel by wire. She read it in front of me, raised an eyebrow at a sentence that tried too hard, and underlined 3 words I had apologized for without realizing. "This is you," she said. "We'll let them decide whether they deserve you." She looked at her watch. "Come by at 4, the coordinator has an update." My chest did a small rebellious leap like hope had learned to jump again. I filled the hours between with work that made get through the day feel like more than a survival tactic. I called the podcast and recorded an interview in a quiet room where my voice sounded like it belonged to a person who knew her own lines. I emailed the artist I had cancelled and wrote, "My absence was not a choice. If you'll have me, I'd still love to come." She replied, "I knew something was off. Come Saturday. Bring your whole messy self." At 3:58 I was outside Martha's office. She opened the door before I could knock. "They've reinstated your candidacy," she said without preamble. "No penalty. Your interview is next Wednesday. You will come prepared to talk about your work, not to relitigate harm. The legal department will deal with the rest." She held my gaze until understanding landed exactly where she wanted it. Do not waste your best words on the person who tried to steal them. Spend them on the room that will multiply them. Relief this time did not make me laugh. It made me sit. Martha poured water without asking, another woman who has turned feeding into a sacrament that requires no church. "We will also," she added, "be reviewing Ms. Sharon's volunteer status with our affiliate board." "It appears she has overreached." The word was a velvet hammer. "We do not feed ego with access," she said. "Not here." I walked home through a city that suddenly seemed to have more benches. My phone buzzed again. "Sharon, are you really doing this to me?" "To me." The grammar told the whole story. I typed and erased 3 different sentences that would have kept the fight alive like a low flame. Then I wrote, "Do not contact me again," and hit send. I blocked the number. I blocked the email that had forwarded my life to a stranger named Stillwater. I blocked the part of me that confuses closure with kindness. The days between the reinstatement and the interview taught me a virtue I had avoided: focus. I practiced questions with Daisy, whose notes were arrows and balm in equal measure. I ran my slides past Mina, who said sweetly brutal things like, "You sound like a brochure here, say what you mean." I slept. Not the agitated sleep of the nearly drowned, the kind that arrives when a person spends her body on work that is hers to do. On Wednesday, I wore the suit I had been saving for when I became the kind of person who wore suits without feeling like she was in costume. In the mirror, I looked like a woman who has packed her own parachute. The committee room wasn't grand, just bright. 3 people with pens, 1 person with the kind of quiet that makes other people perform. I chose to be the quiet and let my work be the noise. They asked what I believed curation was for. I said, to build rooms where more than one story can breathe at once without choking each other. They asked about risk. I said, I'm done confusing spectacle with courage. Risk is inviting tenderness into a space that rewards edge. They asked about my past, and I gave them exactly what it needed, a timeline of choices, not a tour of wounds. At the end, the quiet one smiled in a way that didn't try to promise anything and said, "Thank you for bringing your whole voice." When I left, my knees tried to be jelly. I let them and stood anyway. 2 blocks from the building, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something in me said answer. "Is this Chloe?" a woman asked, brisk and kind. "This is the coordinator from the festival podcast's partner nonprofit. We've listened to your interview. We'd like to invite you to keynote our spring event on creative ethics." I stopped walking because my legs would have given me away. "Yes," I said, and breathed in a way that made room for that word to live. She continued, "We believe in featuring voices who understand the difference between help and control." It took me a second to realize she was telling me she'd heard more than my portfolio in that interview. "I'll send details," she said. "Congratulations." The Whitlock email came a week later, late enough that I'd practiced several stoic reactions. Subject line, offer. I did not open it standing. I sat at the small table I had dragged home from a sidewalk and repaired with glue and a clamp and the certainty that broken things can be both honest and useful. The first line was short: "We are delighted to offer you the fellowship." I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I closed my eyes and found that quiet room in my chest and said, to no one and to the girl who once thought she needed rescuing every time the world raised its voice, "You did that." Then I forwarded the email to my mother with exactly 2 words. "We won." She sent back a string of praise hands and a voice note of her crying, laughing, praying hybrid that has been my bedtime story since I was 5. Poetic justice never knocked on Sharon's door with a camera crew. It arrived the way she delivered her harm, privately. The board rescinded her access badge pending review. The director stopped copying her on emails that were never hers. Friends she had slowly convinced to make smaller circles around me discovered their inboxes contained messages from me that I had never written and began the long, unglamorous work of me culpas that I didn't make easier or harder. I let them do their own lifting. Daisy and I rebuilt, not because we pretended it hadn't happened, but because we kept namming the gap until it wasn't a trap, just space we chose to cross. Mina sent me a screenshot the day an intern group chat noticed Sharon had privated her Instagram. "Peace to whoever thought they owned you," Mina wrote. They didn't. On a late afternoon shot through with that golden light that makes even dumpsters look like they have a future, I walked past the locksmith's shop. The man who changed my cylinder was closing up. He nodded at me in the way of neighbors who have shared a wordless secret. I went in. "I kept the key you returned," I said, surprising myself with the need to confess. He shrugged. "We all keep trophies," he said. "Some of us call them lessons." At home, I took the small bowl with the rings and the key and the seed of my old self and emptied it. I put the rings in a new envelope labeled archive. I took the key to my building's trash chute and let it go. The sound it made disappearing felt like punctuation. That night I recorded a short voice memo for myself the way some people write prayers on slips of paper and tuck them into walls. "Chloe, you used to think loyalty meant letting people steer. You used to think critique meant love and control meant safety. You learned that boundaries are not gates to keep joy out. They are doors you close softly around your work so it can sing without getting stolen." I saved it with the others, proof of who I am when rooms try to speak over me. There will always be Sharons, people who love the version of you that answers to their narrative, people who learn your passwords, literal and otherwise, and tell themselves that their edits are mercy. There will also always be Marthas, people who look past your panic to your paragraphs and push you toward a table where your voice matters. And there will be Daisies and Minas and locksmiths and buskers and curators and coordinators who will say, each in their language, "We see you," and mean the you that doesn't apologize for the parts that make it hard to label your emails strategic. If you are listening to me because someone is slowly moving your life into folders you didn't make, because withdrawn keeps arriving with your name on it and it isn't your hand on the pen, this is the part I want to hand you like a spare key cut just for you. Change your locks, on your accounts, on your doors, on the part of your mind that thinks love arrives wearing rescue. Keep receipts not to weaponize but to remind yourself that you did not imagine the smoke. Tell the truth in rooms that can hold it. Spend your best words on building, not on chasing someone into a confession they will never give. And when the email comes that says offer, don't forget to say we to the parts of you that didn't believe and kept working anyway. I said yes to Whitlock. I said yes to the keynote. I said yes to breakfast with Daisy and to mentoring Mina into someone who will learn to say no faster than I did. I said no, finally, cleanly, to any voice that tells me gentleness needs a guardian. My work is a room. I'm the one holding the handle from the inside. The morning after I blocked Sharon's number, I woke to a silence that felt less like absence and more like breathing room. For the first time in months, my phone didn't flash with her words, "No, are you awake? No, we need to talk." No strings of guilt disguised as care. Just me, the sun dragging itself up over the city, and the unopened email that still sat in my inbox with the subject line that changed everything. Offer. I opened it again just to see if it was real. The words hadn't rearranged overnight. "We are delighted to offer you the Whitlock Fellowship." I let my eyes linger on delighted. For years I had been the girl who thought she should feel lucky just to be considered. Now here was a sentence telling me I wasn't a guest in the room, I was wanted. Walking into Whitlock for the first day felt like stepping into a cathedral built out of glass and ambition. The halls smelled of new paint and old books, a mix of beginnings and legacies. I could hear my own footsteps too loudly, like the floor wanted to remind me I was here, present, not erased. Each fellow had their own desk, their own small corner of the wide room where light spilled in like forgiveness. Mine had a nameplate, Chloe Hart, clean font, no edits. I ran my finger over it and felt something steady take root in my chest. People greeted me warmly. Some knew my work, some didn't, but no one seemed to carry the shadow of Sharon's whispers. It was like stepping into a world where her hands had never rearranged the narrative. Still, I felt her presence, the way you feel phantom pain after a wound. Every time someone smiled, I wondered if Sharon had already tried to poison that well. Every time someone leaned in to ask me about my project, a part of me flinched, waiting for the words fragile or overreacting to sneak into the conversation. The first week was a blur of meetings and introductions. We toured archives, handled artifacts with gloves that made our hands look like they belonged to surgeons, listened to lectures from curators who had been shaping history for decades. I should have been elated. Instead, at night, when the fellowship building emptied out, I found myself sitting at my desk long after everyone had gone, scrolling through old emails, rereading the forged words Sharon had sent in my name. It was like poking a bruise, reminding myself it was still there. It didn't take long for her shadow to find its way in. On Thursday, during a coffee break, one of the coordinators, a kind man named Elias, leaned toward me with concern etched in his brow. "Chloe, are you doing all right? I heard you've been overwhelmed. Someone said you were thinking of stepping back." My stomach sank. "Who told you that?" I asked too quickly. He hesitated. "It came up in conversation with a few board members. Someone close to you reached out." I didn't need him to say the name. Sharon, even blocked, she'd found a way to slip her voice into a room where I was finally standing on my own. That night, back in my apartment, I stared at the ceiling until my eyes ached. The old Chloe would have picked up the phone, called her, demanded an explanation, maybe even forgiven her if she'd strung together the right words. But the Chloe who had walked into Whitlock with her name on a desk plate knew better. Betrayal doesn't end when you block a number. It ends when you stop letting the voice echo in your decisions. So I wrote an email to Elias, calm, direct. "I am fully committed to the fellowship. If anyone suggests otherwise, please consider it misinformation. My work deserves this space and I intend to give it everything." He replied within the hour, "Understood, thank you for clarifying." Short, professional, but enough to steady me again. Sharon was trying one last desperate move, twisting the narrative, painting herself as the caretaker of my fragility, the voice of reason who had saved me from ambitions too big for my heart. I could see her fingerprints all over it. She wasn't trying to stop me this time. She was trying to claim authorship of my success, to weave herself into my story as the one who kept me standing. And for the first time I realized something. Sharon didn't just want me small. She wanted me hers. And that was something I could never give her again. The next week at Whitlock was supposed to be ordinary. Workshops in the morning, group critiques in the afternoon, evenings spent drowning in research that felt more like oxygen than obligation. But Sharon had a way of slipping into places she didn't belong, like water through cracks you didn't know were there. It started with whispers. A fellow named Mara approached me after a session, eyes cautious. "I just want to say I don't believe what's being said. You don't strike me as the type." My skin prickled. "What's being said?" I asked, though I already knew. She looked uncomfortable. "That you exaggerate, that you use people's contacts to climb, that you burned a few bridges on the way here." It was the same script Sharon had used with Daisy. Copy-paste sabotage. Quiet, believable lies laced with just enough of my insecurities to stick if someone wanted them to. The worst part wasn't hearing it again. It was knowing exactly who had placed the words in the air and how deliberate it was. Sharon wasn't content with stealing opportunities anymore. She wanted to steal my reputation, leave me standing in a room where every smile was tinged with suspicion. That night I sat at my desk long after the building had gone quiet, the hum of the old heating pipes filling the silence. I pulled out my notebook, the one Sharon had once teased me for carrying everywhere, and I made another list. She wants me to fight her in public. She wants me to look defensive, fragile, exactly like the story she's telling. If I chase every rumor, I'll spend my fellowship proving I belong instead of showing I belong. The only revenge is the work. I underlined the last line twice, then I closed the notebook and went home. But Sharon wasn't done. 2 days later I got an email from an unknown account, no name, just a string of numbers and letters. The subject line, "You owe me." Inside only 2 sentences, "Without me you wouldn't be here. Remember that before you destroy me." It was her voice, even if she thought the mask of anonymity could hide it. The cadence, the self-martyrdom, the way she positioned herself as both savior and victim. I didn't reply. I didn't even save it. I printed it, slid it into the same folder as my Whitlock acceptance letter, and labelled it quietly in my mind, evidence of desperation. The poetic justice came sooner than I expected. At the next Fellows seminar, Martha herself dropped by to observe. She listened as we presented our projects, her gaze sharp but encouraging, the kind of presence that makes you want to sharpen your words. When it was my turn, I spoke plainly. No grand performance, just the truth of my work, why I believe tenderness could be a radical form of curation, why my vision wasn't weakness but strategy. When I finished, Martha nodded once and said, "Clarity, that was it," but the room leaned closer to me after that, as if she had handed me a crown made of one word. After the session, Mara pulled me aside again. "I think I owe you an apology," she said, her cheeks pink. "That story going around, it fell apart the second you spoke. It didn't fit you. Whoever started it, they underestimated how much your work speaks louder than gossip." I didn't need her apology, but I accepted it anyway, because the truth was Sharon's voice was losing power, not because she stopped talking, but because I had stopped carrying her narrative for her. Days later, word reached me that Sharon had tried to angle herself onto another committee in the city, the kind of small board that feeds off prestige, but someone on that board also sat on Whitlock's periphery. They'd heard about the email breach, the sabotage, the favour that had nearly cost me everything. Her name was quietly struck from the list before the meeting even began. No drama, no confrontation. Just absence, the worst punishment for someone who thrived on being in every room. I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth had done the work for me. For the first time in months, I walked home without checking over my shoulder. The city lights didn't feel like spotlights searching for flaws, they felt like lamps lit just for me. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, unlocked the door with the new key, and realized something simple but monumental. Sharon could no longer touch my future. Not because she'd stopped trying, but because I had finally stopped letting her. The email silence lasted almost 2 weeks, long enough for me to think maybe she had finally accepted defeat, maybe Sharon had found a new canvas for her control. I even caught myself hopping she had, not because I wanted her near someone else, but because I was tired of being the axis she spun her chaos around. But people like Sharon don't leave quietly, they make exits into theatre. It happened on a Friday, the day the fellowship hosted an open session where board members and invited guests walked through our workstations, meeting the fellows. I had been preparing for it all week, fine-tuning my display, rehearsing the words I wanted to say, making sure my story was my own, no edits allowed. I was setting out my final notes when I saw her, Sharon, standing just beyond the glass doors, dressed in her best, I belong here outfit, smile tight and eyes scanning the room like a hunter pretending to be a guest. My stomach lurched, but my body didn't move. I watched as she charmed the front desk assistant with a confidence only liars can pull off. Moments later, she was in the room, weaving between tables, greeting people she barely knew like old friends. When she reached my table, she leaned in as if we were still conspirators. "Chloe," she whispered, low enough that only I could hear, "don't forget who got you here." For a moment, the old Chloe twitched inside me, the one who would have panicked, who would have scrambled to prove herself, who would have let Sharon's voice rewrite the story. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I straightened my shoulders, met her eyes and said, clearly enough for the 2 board members standing nearby to hear, "Sharon, you don't belong here. Please leave." Her face faltered for half a second before she recovered, plastering on a smile. "I'm just here to support my dear friend," she said sweetly, turning to the board members. "We've been inseparable for years." It might have worked, it would have worked months ago, but not today, because Martha had been standing just a few steps away, watching. She approached with the calm authority of someone who doesn't need to raise her voice to silence a room. "Ms. Sharon," she said, voice like a verdict, "this event is for fellows and their invited guests. You are neither. I'll have to ask you to leave." Sharon's smile cracked. "I was invited," she insisted, her eyes darting to me, pleading, threatening all at once. "Chloe wants me here, don't you?" And that was the moment, the fork in the road, the trap she had set my entire life, make me choose between her approval and my own freedom. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "No, I don't." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. The board members glanced at each other. Martha nodded once to the security staff by the door. Sharon's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came. For the first time, she didn't have a script. They escorted her out, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks in a sentence no one wanted to finish. She didn't look back. and I didn't chase her. When the doors closed behind her, the air shifted. It was as if someone had opened a window, letting in fresh oxygen. I turned back to my table, to my notes, to the fellowship board members who were waiting patiently, and I spoke, not about Sharon, not about betrayal, but about my work, my vision, my voice. By the end of the evening, I wasn't just Chloe who survived. I was Chloe who owned her space.